Exactly what we're doing now. Bruce Olson is with us. He has written 2 volumes on the history of St. Louis called That St. Louis Thing, Volume 1 and Volume 2. He's going to be at a book signing at Left Bank Books in the Central West End on Wednesday at 7 p.m. with books and music and a whole lot of fun. Bruce Olson, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Hi, great to be here.
So we were talking off the air. You moved to St. Louis when?
6 years ago.
Now, we should say that you are a journalist. You worked for Reuters. You worked for UPI back when it was UPI.
Right.
And you moved here how long ago?
It's about 6 years ago.
And how did you get to St. Louis?
We got here after our music club and restaurant suffered some financial difficulties on the Oregon coast because of the recession. And we were looking around for a place to live. And diversity, entertainment, expense, the whole setup here was excellent.
So you opened up a map and said St. Louis?
More or less, right.
Really?
We looked on the internet as well.
Yeah, what did you, okay, the map on the internet. What was your perception of St. Louis before moving here?
Well, I had been here a couple of times before, and it was a city that was sort of downgraded in my mind. I wasn't really too excited about it. Now, 2 of our sons lived here as well. They had both migrated here, and they were here, and they had come and gone and back and forth, and so they had some stories about St. Louis as well.
Okay, so they sort of
They sort of guided us toward it, but we still made our own choice.
And 6 years later, you've written 2 gigantic volumes.
That's right.
About St. Louis. So
That's
clearly, something's in the water here.
Something's in the water.
Something got to you about St. Louis.
Well, what happened to me was that a guy who I knew from Oregon, from the Oregon coast, a musician, a guy named Jeremy Siegel Moss, who plays with the Bottoms Up Blues Gang, had played out there 5 times. And we had talked about St. Louis history, the music history, and so on, in various late-night sessions. And when I got here, he said, okay, here's a box. I've got all this stuff from all these musicians, and they have great aspirations of getting a book written about St. Louis blues. Mm-hmm. And so he said, you're the journalist, Bruce. You write the book. I'll keep playing my guitar, and you can go on and write this book. So I started out with all of this stuff, and I started sifting through it. Then I got the history bug. I worked for a wire service, which meant that I worked daily and wrote stories about 800 words, 500 to 800 words. Right. So I always wanted to write something more than 800 words. Well, 450,000 words later, Mike.
You only have volume 1 and volume 2. So it's the history of music here in St. Louis?
It's music, and then I started getting interested in the city's history. Right. In the Civil Rights Movement, in the World's Fair, in Lindbergh, and the whole baseball scene. I've got 3 chapters on baseball in there. So I've tried to write the book as a swirling kind of kaleidoscope of the city, and it's written in a style that a newspaper reporter would write, not a history professor. Right. Even though I do have the footnotes and so on, the real research came from the stuff that I got from Jeremy, the music stuff, which was a lot of old posters and interviews and stuff like that. Right. The other big source was the St. Louis room in the library. The St. Louis room in the library has 8.5 by 11 folders on everything. If you want to look up Lee Shelton, who is Stagger Lee, turns out to be Stagger Lee, there's a 8.5 by 11 folder down there that shows the original newspaper clips, all of the various stuff. And the book is a dipping book. It's a book you can pick up and you can dip. You can pick up page 185 and just read that line and off you go. Yeah. You can start in the 2nd volume, you can start in the 1st volume. It's kind of a research book. Yeah. Kind of a reference book. It's a book you want to have on your library, in your library, and you know, it was great fun, and I really got involved in it. Clearly. And it took me 5 years, and finally I got it all published, and it's gone over very well. People like it.
So that St. Louis Thing, Volume 1 and Volume 2, you can get it at Left Bank Books, also bookstores around the area. And then Wednesday night, 7 p.m. for a book signing and a book reading. When your friend gave you that box, what was in that box? I mean,
it was a lot of old issues of the Blues Letter, which is the Blues Society newsletter that went back 20 years. Right. It was a lot of posters. He had saved a lot of posters, and people had given him stuff. So the first year, what I did was I went around, I saw 75 different live shows, and I kept set lists. I had my notepad. I had my set lists. I had my...
So you're a music guy to begin with.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I love music, and I had a music club on the Oregon coast.
Right.
That was the...
that was your deal.
We did 10 years. I was a booker for the music stuff. I had written some music for the wire services, but that was mostly the bailiwick of the critics and the
Right.
guys. So I covered Bob Dylan when he played Madison Square Garden, for instance, and his that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So it would be stories like that, feature stories on musicians.
Yeah.
So I love music.
But so this, what is it about St. Louis? Because people is sort of like a dome around St. Louis. People don't.
You're right.
People don't outside of St. Louis don't realize the historical significance
That's right.
of St. Louis,
That's right.
both in history and in music and in sports and everything else.
Right. And that was the historical amnesia I found when I got here. I went to a bookstore and I said, "Where's the book on St. Louis? I want a history book." And they said, "Well, here's a shelf." And they showed me 15 different books on different little aspects of St. Louis. You've got the history of the Budweiser Company. You've got
Right.
so on and so forth. So I said, well, I'm a wire service journalist. What I do is write roundups. So I'll write a big roundup and give this to the city, and maybe they'll get rid of some of this amnesia, because ragtime, jazz, blues, rock and roll, you name it on the music front, and the civil rights movement, which goes back to 1910. And it started out in a very progressive fashion, and it's always kept that same progressive state. There's never been a really big riot in St. Louis. There's been marches and protests at Ferguson, especially. That was actually the biggest civil rights stuff that had
what about
ever
East
happened.
St. Louis? You're not talking about East St. Louis, though.
I'm talking about
It's St. Louis.
not East St.
You're
Louis.
just
No,
talking St.
East St. Louis had 1917, which I have a chapter in.
Right.
About the riot over there, and that was kind of a spin-off on St. Louis, so it wasn't completely bland here. I'm not saying that.
Right. Yeah.
But it was a different impression, I think, than most people get when they're outside of the city. First of all, they don't know how affordable it is. That's the first thing people just are stunned by.
Right.
My friends come here and they go, $3 for a beer?
Right.
What is this, 1958? You're kidding me. This can't be. That beer, it's New York, is $9.
Right.
So it's not only just half price, it's 67% off for a beer.
Yeah.
And my wife and I talk about the 20% discount here. We have a 20% discount in St. Louis everywhere you go from where we used to live.
Right.
Which was New York, the Oregon coast, Seattle, places like that. So it's got a real underground kind of quality to it.
Yeah.
And we really love it here. We really enjoy it.
Are your two sons still here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
they're both still here.
All right, the books. It really is the history of St. Louis, Part 1 and Part 2. That St. Louis Thing, Volume 1 and Volume 2. The first one's music. The second one's...
No. It's all spun together.
It's all spun together.
All as you go. It's the present, the past, the future.
You are right in that you can open up to any page and sort of pick up a little bits and...
It's chronological only in the sense of the development of the music. But when I talk about St. Louis Blues, I talk about, what's her name? I talk about current musicians who play the St. Louis Blues.
Okay.
Brian Casserly plays a tremendous trumpet solo on the St. Louis Blues at Joe's Cafe once in a while.
Gotcha.
People like that. That's in there. All the current stuff is in there, as well as the past.
What's the one piece of historical thing you found that you said, wow? I didn't know that.
That's always a hard one. There's so many little things. One that just pops into my head was that in the 20s and 30s, three of the top 5 selling musicians in the United States were in St. Louis for those 2 decades.
Really?
3 out of 5.
Who were they?
And I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. You can look it up.
There you go. There's the capitalist
thing.
for you. That St. Louis Thing, Volume 1 and 2. Book signing, book reading, Left Bank Books, this Wednesday, 7 p.m. Bruce Olson, thanks for your time And good luck with the books.
Yeah, let me just plug the musicians on it. It's going to be Brian Kern. It's going to be Gail and, Sharon and Doug Foner. And it's going to be a guy by the name of Seymour Heine. And he's going to be playing as well.
He was just flying in from Raleigh-Durham on that American Airlines flight. The guy's nickname is Seymour Heine.
The nickname, his stage name.
His stage name is Seymour Heine.
That's right.
Aha. What's his real name?
David Robinson.
I'm afraid to ask.
And
all right.
That was a good name. That's it. That's a real name.
Bruce Olson, Wednesday at Left Bank Books. Thanks for coming in. 8:20.
Thank you very much.